rates which made banks a fortune. There is a reason why in every town in America, if you go to the main intersection in the town, the most imposing building with the marble walls is not the grocery store or the hamburger joint or the hardware store. You know which building it is. It's the bank. And on behalf of all bankers, to the American working class, I want to say thank you. You have been very generous. So 2007 arrives, and we have no mystery at all. The American working class is physically exhausted. It works more hours than anybody else. It's emotionally stressed because its family has been ripped apart by all these pressures. And it is freaked out by the level of debt because it's borrowed more than it knows it can pay back. So we reach 2007 with the mass of our people in an economic dead end. Now let's look quickly at how it went for the employers over the last 30 years. I'm going to say this now just to make you feel better. As bad as it was for the workers, that's how good it was for the employers. And this is not because they're greedy or not greedy. Just try to understand the situation. For the last 30 years, and by the way, at this moment, and only now, I'm going to go to the board here, I'm going to take a magic marker, and I'm going to do this thing that economists do. In economics, we like to write lines on the board. It makes us feel scientific. And so bear with me. I'm going to draw it real simply. This is a simple line. This is 1970, and this is 2010. And this first line shows productivity. This is a line that shows how much stuff American workers were producing in every hour that they worked. And because over these last 30 years, we've worked with more machines and better machines and all the rest of it, the workers became more and more productive. In every hour that you work for your employer, you deliver more stuff to him or her because you're better educated, better trained, have more machines. And you know the really big new development of the last 30 years? The computer. That makes us all more productive. So the productivity of the American worker went up. Every hour of our work, we gave the employer more. And on behalf of all employers, I want to say, thank you. And what did the employers give us? That's what it means if wages don't go up. Our wages didn't go up. What the employer gave us stayed about the same. Hello? You need an advanced degree for this? The difference between what we give to the employer for every hour keeps going up. And what the employer gives us doesn't. The gap between these two, that's the profits of the employer. Over the last 30 years, American employers had nirvana for themselves. They had a condition never before experienced. Of course we had a stock market boom. Of course the gap between rich and poor in America got much bigger. Of course it did. Rich people are the ones who get this. The rest of you and me, we get this. And so the world looks differently. Employers had an unbelievable situation. Why? Because in the 1970s, they didn't have to pay wages in rising wages anymore. And remember what I told you? They had to before because we had a labor shortage. They didn't in the 1970s or since because we don't have a labor shortage anymore. Why not? Real simple. Computers replaced people on a massive scale. You don't need so many people. Try to think, for example, of a supermarket. Once upon a time, a supermarket had to hire a lot of people to keep track of how many boxes of Rice Krispies were taken off the shelf as people bought their morning cereal. And someone had to check to make sure that when there were only a few boxes left, they would call the Kellogg company and get another shipment so it would be there. Nowadays, you know, when you buy something at the supermarket, there's a little scanning device. One person sitting in Boise, Idaho, can tell you exactly how many boxes of cereal have to be purchased from each of the 800 stores that that company runs. You don't need all those people in each store. The computer substitutes for people. The second thing that happened in the 1970s was American companies decided to do something on a massive scale. And that is to move production out of the United States to places where the work will be done for much less money. And that means fewer jobs here. By the way, why did American companies do it in the 70s? No mystery. World War II was a war that destroyed all the competitors of the United States. Britain, France, Germany, Japan, whatever you look, decimated. At the end of World War II, one country was able to produce what the world needed, this one, the United States. We had jobs, we had work to do because we had to supply the whole world, which we did. By 30 years later, by the 1970s, Germany and Japan and those other countries had caught up. They had rebuilt from the decimation of the war. And they knew how they had to rebuild, because America was number one. They knew their only hope as businessmen and women would be to produce what America had produced better and cheaper, because if they couldn't do that, they wouldn't have a chance. And that's why you drive a Toyota. Because they figured out how to produce it better and cheaper. So the United States companies suddenly realized they had real competitors. They hadn't had it for 30 years, from 1945 to 75. And how were they going to fight the competition? They joined them. They moved production out of the United States to wherever they could produce more cheaply, which mostly meant where the wages were much lower. So there were less demand for jobs, because of the computer, because of export of jobs. But at the same time, in the 1970s, something happened that made it even more clear that companies didn't have to raise wages. Those women I talked to you about were moving into the labor force, looking for work. And new waves of immigrants, particularly from Central and Southern America, were coming in. So we had more people looking at a time when there were fewer jobs. So employers suddenly discovered we don't have to raise the wages anymore the way we had to for 150 years. And because of the way capitalism as a system works, if the employer doesn't have to, he doesn't do it. It's not because he's greedy or nasty or nice. Some of them are all those things. But the point is, it's good business. If you doubt me, take a course in any business school. They'll explain to you. If you don't have to pay the worker more wages, here's a hint. Don't do it. You'll do better that way. Not an advanced rocket science business. So businesses did wonderfully. They didn't raise wages anymore, but they got more and more from their workers, and suddenly the earnings, the profits of American business in the 70s went crazy. And now let's follow the bouncing ball and you'll see the crisis. Here it comes. First thing that the business community did, looking at the statistics, wow, are we making money? Did they tell the story that I'm telling you here? No. They did something all too human. Here's the story our American business told everybody. The profits that are zooming, the money coming in, that's because we're managerial geniuses. We are entrepreneurial wizards. We're people like Lee Iacocca or Jack Welch or other names that came to be known, sort of like basketball stars. Because they told a story which a lot of Americans believe, that whereas before they had been kind of slow and dumb, in the 1970s they became suddenly smart and brilliant, and that the companies were doing real well because they were such great managers. Hello? You don't have to be a great manager if you're getting more and more from your worker and you're not having to pay him anything. That's not about management. That's about cashing in on a social situation that's changed. But the corporations got away with it. So they began to say, if our managers are such geniuses, you love the logic, well then we ought to pay them accordingly. And so in the 1970s, corporations' top managers began to pay themselves salaries the likes of which no one had ever seen before. You all know about it now because in the last year or so there have been scandals about it. If you're upset, that's good, you're just 30 years late. Because it's been going on a long time. Look, it's better that you become aware and angry late than never. But this is all. What else did they do with this